I've got a nice Saito 56 here that I just purchased from RCGroups about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago or so. And I just performed a box to the bench review on it, so I just had it outside and I ran it. I wanted to check it out, make sure the engine looked like it would run alright. And it was in good enough shape to go ahead and put on the stand for a run. But now that I've run it, I want to go ahead and tear it down, inspect the internal components, see if there's any excessive wear, or try and estimate about how much run time it's got on it. So that's what I'm going to do now. Overall, this engine's in pretty darn good shape. I have no idea how old it is, but seeing as it's got the plastic throttle arm, I would have to say this is a 2000s plus engine, at least, probably 2004 or newer. I think they were still using the metal throttle arm in the 90s. So I'll probably do a pretty complete teardown on this, just so I can kind of check out those bearings. Rock arms look good, nothing unusual there. Let's take this carb off. None of the screw heads look damaged. It's always a good thing to look for before you start taking an engine apart. Make sure there's no rounded off screw holes. Now when I was running it, I did think I saw a little bit of leakage here from the carb, so this thing may need a carb rebuild. Might need a new O-ring in there. I might have one on hand, but I'm not sure. But I thought, and it wasn't just a normal condensation, it looked like I saw something happening there. Pretty tight fit. Maybe it was my imagination, but we'll take a look at it a little bit further. Pop this plug out. If nothing else, I'm going to clean this engine up real good. You know, there's some kind of filth on it. Let's see, let's take the back plate off. Obviously there's some swirl marks there. Don't look too bad inside there. Crank counterweight kind of looks dry, but overall don't look too bad. There's my gasket. Let's put these screws here. I'll continue on with the disassembly here. Now about the only tricky thing about taking a Saito engine apart is if you want to really take the timing gear and all that stuff off, or if you want to, if you want to drop the valves, which I kind of want to do on this engine, so you got to get these rocker arms off. And I've run into more than one Saito engine where these retaining pins were so torqued that I really couldn't even get them out. There was one engine that I just gave up on trying to get them out because I was afraid I was just going to damage the engine. So these things are kind of tricky, so I'm hoping that I don't need too much effort. In fact, I actually modified a special screwdriver just for this operation. Now this one feels really tight, and this one too feels extremely tight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out and hit them with a heat gun and see if that'll loosen that up. Okay, with the application of some heat, and only heat, I didn't use any PB blast or anything, I was able to get these pins free, which is kind of a big relief because not being able to get these things out really kind of sucks, especially if you're doing a complete overhaul of the engine. So I got my UGG glove on still because the engine's still a little bit hot. Okay. Alright, great. Those are out. Now we can lift these rocker arms off. Put those in my bin. Pull the push rods out. Now on Saito push rods, there's a tapered end and a non-tapered end. The tapered end goes upward. They can be interchanged, exhaust the intake, but there is an end difference there. So now we can continue and take the head off. Okay, so we got our head separated from our crankcase now. So let's set the head aside for now. Let's take a look at the crankcase here. There's some oil in there because I just ran the thing. I didn't really open it up at all before I ran it, so I'm not sure if this is all just residual oil from me running it or if there was some already in there. Back of the crankshaft looked pretty dry to me. So I'm going to take the covers off here, or the timing cover off. This rubber feels good. Doesn't feel like it's old and dry, rotted, or worn out. Quite a bit of oil in that one. So there should be a gasket underneath this, which, like most Saito gaskets, survives for many years. Doesn't adhere to the engine and get torn like Enya gaskets do, unfortunately. So this should still be able to use this gasket, assuming there is one. And there is one. And there it is. Nice gasket, good shape. Okay. So as I just turn this, I don't necessarily like the way these bearings feel. Probably going to have to order a set and replace them. So if you can see in here, the Saito 56, 65 all the way down to 45, or the 40, have this drive gear, or it's a pinion gear that's actually just a loose fit onto the crankshaft, and it's held in a certain spot with a roll pin in the crankshaft. Now that should just come right off, but you know, after years of running and sitting, that's going to be pretty well adhered to this engine. So now for me to get the crankshaft out and subsequently replace the bearings, I'm going to have to go out and really heat this thing up really good. And then I'll get a screwdriver, a Phillips head screwdriver, that'll just fit in the top here. I don't want to be pounding directly on the crankshaft, but I'll put a Phillips head screwdriver. There's an indentation in the crankshaft where they milled it, and I'll just hammer that pretty hard, because there's several parts of the friction fit here that you've got to break free. You've got this tapered collar that really gets adhered in there, as well as the friction fit of the crankshaft in the bearings themselves. So a lot of times this rear bearing will come out with the crankshaft because this pinion gear may not necessarily be free enough to come out, so it may actually pull the bearing out. This can take some effort. Like I said, I'm going to heat this up really hot, and it can take several really hard strikes. I'll put this on a piece of wood and a rubber mallet and just really rap on this thing to get it out. So the next segment should show me with the crankshaft out. Okay, that turned out to be a lot easier than I thought. I heated it up really well, and it only took about 3 to 4 strikes before I started to move the crankshaft. And the crankshaft came out, and then it kind of hung up here. The pinion gear did not want to come out, so then I just tapped it a few more times and it did come off. So the rear bearing, unfortunately, is still in the engine, and is the front. So now what this means is for me to drive these bearings out, I'm going to have to get the front out first, which means I'm going to have to put a little socket on here that's just enough to go through this hole and catch this bearing and drive it out, and then I can do basically the same thing with the rear bearing. I believe. Yeah, there's enough surface there to get. So one of the things I'm noticing that I don't particularly care for is this front bearing doesn't feel very good. The other thing is it's a sealed bearing. Typically you don't put these sealed bearings on engines, or at least you take the rear seal off so that it gets adequate lubrication. It's okay to have a seal on the front, but I would never, these are not the stock bearings that came in this engine is the bottom line. Bearings have been replaced. I don't believe Saito uses rubber sealed bearings like this because you just don't do that. Now when I replace these, I'll buy metal shielded bearings and remove the shield from the rear so that the balls in the rear of the bearing can get lubricated. This main bearing, it makes some noise too. So these bearings need to be replaced, bottom line. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to get this engine reassembled and running today because of that, but I am going to go and drive those engine bearings out. But in the meantime, I can go ahead and take this timing gear apart, because I am going to take it out. I want to check it out, make sure it's got the washers that are supposed to be in here. I've had some discussions with some modelers in the, actually very recently about what the washers should be that are here. Now the older engines, the older Saito engines, they use strictly Teflon bearings or Teflon discs in there. Teflon rings as a bearing surface. And in later engines, probably in the 2000s, they went to a little steel. But the key is that there should be something in there to provide a bearing surface, otherwise this thing will bind up and lock up, and that's not a good thing. I actually had that happen on one of my Saito twin cylinder engines. Not sure why, but it did happen. So I just loosened this set screw here, and that engages in a cutout in this timing shaft. So now this timing shaft should just slide right out, and now we can see what kind of things we've got in here. So this one is one of the ones that's got the little steel bearings on one end and nothing on the other. Oh wait, there we go, it's there. So this one is an example of one that uses two little steel bearings. That's the first time I've had one of these engines, I think, that I've torn apart anyway. All of my others have the little Teflon bearings. So let's push these cam followers out. I'm going to put all of this stuff in a bin of LA's Totally Awesome Cleaner and let it sit and just eat up all the gunk on all of this. Get this engine, all these engine components really nice and clean.